And good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give everybody another minute or so to hop on here. We got a full house again today. So, welcome to the final episode of our supply chain webinar series. My name is David Carrick. I'm the Associate Director of the West Virginia University Industrial Extension. As you've probably heard over the past webinars, we've received funding to support these education sessions about supply chain in order to help small manufacturers build their domestic supply chain. We want to provide you with as much information as possible and see what supply chain really means and how West Virginia companies can use a practical approach to enter new markets if they're interested and capable. While we don't currently offer supply chain specific services, we do want to learn as much as we can so that we can create services to support your growth. Once again, we have Adam Lowe with us for the fifth and final episode. Adam is a native West Virginian, a graduate from WVU, served in the military. In addition to having experience with working with a tier one DoD supplier, he's also started a consulting practice to support this effort nationwide so we can bring more manufacturing back to America and as much as possible to West Virginia. We will be recording this session, so you can play it back as much as needed to catch up on any of the additional sessions. We can also send you those as well. If you have questions, please place them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that to make sure we get as many questions as we can answered. And again, Adam, welcome and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Dave. I greatly appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to come back to my favorite state in the union and do a little bit of work to try to help the manufacturers in West Virginia and the surrounding areas to just kind of increase your profitability, to hone in on some of those good practices for your supply chain strategy and your supply chain organizations, or just individuals in your supply chain roles. So thank you so much to your group, the WVUIE group. I will give you all so much thanks and credit for what you do there. I'm greatly appreciative as a native West Virginian for the folks in the state and the businesses in the state that, for you all offering your services and what you do. So yeah, a little plug for you. You all have some fantastic people on your staff, and I would absolutely encourage anybody to reach out to you if they need support in the different areas of focus that you have there. So thank you for bringing me on and offering me the platform to support in this way as well. So yes, you mentioned it is the fifth and final installment of our webinar series, and it's a little bit bittersweet for me. I've had a great time answering some of the questions, delivering some of the content, and helping out the group here. So as we've gone through, if you've been with us since the beginning, you'll know that we're kind of building off of what happened last session. So if this is your first time, don't worry. I'm going to do a review, a little bit of an extended review, not a deep review, but again, as Dave was saying, we'll be able to send you those earlier sessions if you want to see those and kind of go in depth into what we were discussing during those sessions. But I will give a quick rundown here. I will get started. I'll change this. So we'll do a bit of a review. And for this session, we're going to be a little bit more looking into the future. So some of this will be a bit of conjecture, a bit of understanding kind of where we've been, where we are today, and where we might be going in the future. So these won't be exact, but I would say that it's a pretty good view into what you're going to be seeing in the supply chain industry, in the supply chain kind of maybe thought process, philosophy moving forward, and then strategies moving forward as well. So we'll talk about positioning yourself for the future, some concepts. There'll be a few concepts we'll go through that are very, very likely to impact your day-to-day in the supply chain world. And as a supplier, we'll talk about technologies that are coming. I'm not going to go in depth there because they are kind of wide ranging, but we will talk about some kind of general technologies that you might want to be thinking about. And then we'll talk about strategy. And so, yeah, I say the word thinking. We're going to be thinking about future a little bit. We're going to be thinking about how you set your strategy up to better place yourself. So this is kind of another thought, kind of in relation to what we did on the first session. We talked a lot about thinking. Well, we're going to talk a lot about thinking here as well. And we're going to base it off of what we talked about in session 2, 3, and 4 about being the best supplier you can be, evaluating your operation, and kind of linking that into where you want to go moving forward in the future. So we'll talk about that in the strategy section. So to review a bit, we'll jump back into session 1. So we did talk about your company why, and what that is essentially just the idea of why you do what you do as a company. Who are you serving? What areas do you focus on? not necessarily what you do or how you do it, because we all kind of understand that portion of it in operations and in strategy and in supply chain, but more of the why, so that you can align your supply chain strategy with those like-minded either vendors or customers who are in the same field. So there's an element of doing business outside of your company, but you want to make sure that that strategy is incorporated within your overall mission for your company. So we talked a little bit about that and how you can think a bit bigger, a little bit of a bigger picture. So if you are using your supply chain network that you've created either as a supplier or at being supplied by vendors, how do you use both ends of that on that chain, both within the link that you are, because we did talk a lot about being the kind of big picture supply chain as an overall operation kind of strategy. So you as a company are a supplier. You are the link of the supply chain for something. Either you're getting raw material and you're processing it, adding value, and then selling it to a customer, and that is the link you have, or you're receiving materials to do business, adding value during your manufacturing operations, and then you're selling it to a customer either for final use or to be a member of someone else's supply chain and add value to your product. So in that line, you're going to be able to have communication with your vendors, and you're going to be able to communicate with your customers. So, looking for opportunities within that structure of your supply chain, the front end and back end, for potential other revenue offerings. So revenue generating, you know, either product lines or advice, or it can be a lot of different things that you can package up and sell and increase your revenue that way. So, we talked a little bit about that type of a strategy early on, and just in the thinking and the big picture thinking kind of element of what we can use our supply chain for, and those different roles within our company. I will go super deep into session number 2. It was very definition heavy, so if you want to see that, go back and jump in there. We did a kind of a mock company that was walking through how to create some X-ray specs and the different elements of from design all the way through to final delivery. And we talked a little bit about some of the supply chain language that you might hear at those different stages. So if you're involved in the operations portion, you can hear some supply chain language. If you're sitting at a table and you're negotiating or discussing, these are some of the terms that we use during those processes, or even during the manufacturing stages or design stages that relate to supply chain. So if you're brand new to supply chain, you're very new to that kind of element, it'll give you a little bit of a heads up of what you may hear, so that when you're sitting at that table, you can be ready and kind of understand what is being spoken about during that time. In session 3, we talked about cost, speed, quality, and rarity. These are kind of your selling points for your business. As we all know, speed and cost are two of the highest level elements of how we position our company to be a key supplier for someone. Either we're very, very fast, we might be cost a little more, but we're very, very quick and we can get it to you today, or a combination of all of those as well. Or we have a very good cost and quality, but maybe it takes a little longer. So you can kind of position your supply chain and your messaging based on those different key points, and then that's how you can kind of discuss it and probe to find out what your customers are looking for, and then you can kind of pivot yourself or maneuver yourself, massage your company to be more what is in line with what your customers need, and sometimes what is in line with what your vendors need. So you may need to reach in that direction to become a really solid supply chain as well, so that you're helping your vendors to meet your goals and your needs as well. So we talked a little bit about that during that session. We also talked about building integrity and trust, which is two of the key pieces of a business operation for your customers and for your vendors, to have integrity and trust. And we did that through expertise, operations, communications, delivery, and solutions. So we use those kind of keywords to describe what a really solid, kind of ideal supplier would look like for this type of material, and then what we can do within our supply chain operations or supply chain organization to increase our expertise, our operation, to help with that, to help with our communications, to be deliver on time, the right product at the right time, and then overall we're coming up with good solutions for what our customers need. Then we use that same framework in session 4 to talk about kind of rebuilding or maybe initially building that integrity and trust. So if our operation isn't quite up to where we would like it to be, how do we evaluate? Which is one of the things we talked pretty heavily about in that session, is evaluation, assessment of our operation, finding the root cause of what is maybe driving some of the not ideal kind of situations that we can sometimes find within our supply chains, and then how do we fix them. So I would definitely encourage go back to that if you are dealing with or struggling with maybe delivery issues and some things. There's some ideas that come out of that that could be helpful for how to assess and how to kind of revamp your operation, get to the root cause of those issues that are causing you maybe problems, and then fixing them kind of at the ground level. So that's the review piece. And again, I'm happy at the end of this to discuss anything that we've talked about throughout any of the different sessions that we've done. So be thinking about that. If you have any questions about any of these kind of 4 previous sessions, be thinking about those. Pass those over to the chat as we're ongoing while we're talking about kind of future state, and we'll address those at the end as well. But that said, I'll go ahead and jump into the first slide for positioning yourself for the future. So with this one, this could be very broad and could be very wide. What I tried to do is come up with some key next step, which is kind of like the most likely next step things you will see within the supply chain community, and in fact overall within your organizations and in your business. What are most likely to be those next up and coming elements that you'll have to consider while you're thinking about future state during your strategization, during your thought process for how you're going to operate moving forward, how you try to become the best supplier you can be. These are some key areas that you may want to consider. And again, for your operation, depending on what you do, depending on what industry you're in, these things may not be as impactful to you today, or they could be extremely impactful, and you may already be, knee deep in them, right now. So, but I can say these will impact all of us to some degree in the near or long term future. So again, it doesn't mean that you have to integrate, adopt, all these great practices right now, or be thinking about how you can, use what might not be, somewhat of a limited budget for these things to kind of just jump in and integrate right today, right? So that might not be the best strategy for your company, but I would say at minimum to start to think about these different elements that are upcoming within the supply chain world and in the operations world, that are going to impact your business. So start today. If you have an opportunity, we talked a lot about in session 3 and session 4 about just creating that framework within your day to day or within your business that allows you the time to consider future state. So what I would say is today is we're going to consider future state and think about, okay, how can you use the current ongoing positive kind of happenstances that are ongoing in the United States right now. As far as like we have the political winds in our favor for bringing manufacturing back to the United States. There's a lot of focus on that now. We also have some issues with costs rising for global requirements or global replenishments that are causing some people some stress. So people are starting and companies are starting to look more internal into the United States for home-based suppliers. So this is a really good time to think about, okay, future state, where are we going, and how can we kind of take those headwinds, the winds that are in our sails right now, and move forward in a positive direction. So the first one I have is digitization. So this one can be very broad. It can be very narrow depending on your operation. But digitization basically is using some sort of technology to capture data and using that data to make decisions at a very base level. So there's a lot more to that, and a professor may slap me on the wrist by kind of, by kind of whittling it down to that simple of a definition. But essentially, that's kind of what we're talking about, is just using a digital footprint or data to drive and operate within our organization. A very simple kind of way to look at this is even something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet where you're capturing data points within your operation. There are also machines that are out on our manufacturing floors that we obviously can use that digital data from. There are databases that we collect, email traffic and the whole thing. It can run the gamut from something very, very simplistic that's just something that's on a desktop, like an Excel data sheet that will collect data for yourself, or a wide-ranging system or a tool that does that kind of in an aggregate, like metadata collection and metadata analysis. So what I will say is that digitization pretty much is the way of the future. Using computers to capture what you're doing and how you're doing it, and then using real-time data points to be able to capture throughput times, delivery times, the amount of time it takes to order. All of those things are being captured in a lot of businesses now. So I guess the way to look at this, if you're a very small operation, you're just getting started, what platform, what are you putting in place now to start capturing some of that? And I'll talk a little bit more about strategy behind all of this in a future slide. So I won't go too in depth into that, but um, essentially with this, the digitization coupled with the integration, number two, um, there's an element of being able to operate within a wider body and a wider network of supply that is going to be presented in the upcoming years for our groups, right? So being able to integrate your data solutions that you've created internally and the data footprint that you have created for your business in some way to a wider network of suppliers or offerings on the global scale or on a statewide or on a U.S. side scale is going to be really important for longevity of business. Essentially, you don't want to be the one company that doesn't have a footprint that's out in the world where it can be digitally identified as a potential supplier. Um, right now, there's a lot of discussions that are going on in different forums about using a somewhat of a digital footprint to help with supplier identification. So being able to at least, again, it's not that you have to spend all of the tons of money and effort and all the tools today and getting them into your small business or medium-sized business, large business. Not necessarily that you have to do that today, but at least thinking about how you may be able to integrate your current operation and then create some strategies and operations internally, whether that be supply chain or actual build operations, that would be a plug-in for that type of a network in future state. So if you have the opportunity of running something, for instance, on the manufacturing floor that is completely kind of off the digital books, um, that's okay. That might work best for your operation. It might make work for the turnaround times that you're providing. However, if there is an opportunity to somehow create a bit of a digital footprint for what you're doing there, whether it be throughput times at different machines or things like that, that you can start capturing that data, long term, that may be a future state iteration of, an iteration well down the road that is, well, you started this strategy 10 years ago by capturing this data, and then that turned into using this tool set that that might be off the shelf tool set, digital tool set that allows you to look at that data a certain way. And then the next step from beyond that is to use that tool set to integrate into a wider range. And then there you go. But because 10 years ago you thought, hey, it might be a good idea to digitize this, to start capturing that data, it allowed you to take those steps to integrate later on and to plug that system into a future state system. So that kind of a thought process is something that you may want to consider when you're considering future strategy. And I said I wasn't going to get into strategy, but I just did. So, but that's something that you may want to start thinking about today. Even like I said, even if you're very much a day-to-day business that doesn't really have a lot of digital footprint, and you might want to think about how you could or should capture some of that data that could be plugged in later state. I'd also mentioned a bit of knowledge. So that does take, if we go back to session 3 and session 4, we talked about creating a knowledge base within your company and being kind of a knowledge holder is a really good indicator that you're a solid supplier. If you know your industry, you know your operation, having that knowledge and understanding what you're doing and how you're doing it is really important when you're pivoting, or when you're trying to gain business or you're trying to, show that you are the key supplier there. Well, this could be a portion of that as well. It's thinking more future state. It's not as much, current state, but it's future state and where we want to be and trying to gain some of that knowledge. So in line with, very popular concept of process improvement, of that lean type of mentality where you're in the state of process and constant process improvement. One of those things that you might be able to do in a supply chain role or in a supply chain organization is to split off and capture some of your time, create a little bit of buffer to do that future state thinking and say, all right, well, thinking about the digital footprint, where might this industry go or where might our industry go in a little bit, or what might be good data for a few years from now for our customers that they'll want to see? And can we start capturing that some way today, even if we don't plug it in to those data tools or whatever? We're at least capturing it, and we're starting that foundation of movement forward. So again, I kind of coupled digitization and integration at the same point. The only other point I make about integration is, again, in a lot of higher level discussions right now, we're talking about speed of business, and what can we do as an overall just company to make us quicker, but not just a company, as a network of companies. If you think about it and you explode your build structure into parts that are incoming versus parts that you might make, and then parts that you sell, is there a way to gain more information from your suppliers, your vendors, that will help you within your operations? So an example of this might be the actual throughput times that your vendors have through their operation, leading to a more accurate delivery time for any subcomponent that you might be buying. So how do we create a world that secures our internal movements and knowledge that we don't want out into the world? So security is a big deal when you start talking about digitization and integration. But how do you secure that, but then also open yourself up to some form of kind of a peek into your operation so that your potential customers can understand more about the true life day-to-day timeframes and maybe expectations of delivery and things like that. So that integration piece is being discussed at top levels. It's not super early on. It's kind of got several different iterations of this, and there's different outworkings of that. But again, this is a thought process on how can you think. Maybe it's a way of how you store or how you operate in the tail end of your operations. Maybe you can make that a little bit more open. You can have a little bit more insight into that. You can start framing that out in a digital footprint or a capture that data as far as your throughput times on the tail end of your processes, and your storage times, and your the amount of time it takes to stage and ship something and to the customer. If there's a way to capture that could be integrated with your customer's delivery schedule, let's say, that's what I'm talking about when I say integration. So that will hopefully, as we move forward, be able to allow more of a definitive understanding of how your operation can integrate to within the supply chain, and then how a supplier can expect you to supply them, and then they can expect to give delivery dates to their supplier chain as well. So again, that's more of it's almost a coupling of businesses there on a more of a digital front, so that you can have a cleaner picture of that throughput all the way from start to finish of a product. Um, another bullet point there, and again, it's kind of a coupled one with number 3 and number 4, is localization and globalization. So future state, again, we talked a little bit about it just a second ago, but future state, um, the integrity of your supply chain it's always going to be a thought when you're as a supplier. When you are selling to someone, they're going to be thinking about, am I going to be able to get what I've ordered when I've ordered it, and on time and on cost, right? So when you think about your operation and how you're bringing in materials within your supply chain, it may behoove you as a supplier to kind of figure out those key components that may need to be brought from a global strategy into more of a local strategy. And again, not saying this is going to work for everyone, because I do know there's cost component, there's all kinds of supplier relationship component that is in there as well. You might have a fantastic supplier who's overseas, and they do a great job, and they get it at the cost that you want, and the whole deal. So there's a lot to be considered there. However, when you think about the structure of your operation and whether or not you're going to continue to be able to deliver what you say you're going to be able to deliver, something you can look at potentially is there a more local source that we could consider for key components. So I believe that is something to it. Again, this is a thought process to bring into the discussion and say, yes, it may be a little bit more expensive, but having that local component might be worth it long term if we're concerned about our supply line, especially with all that's going on in the globe right now. We know that there's potential to have an upset here, an upset there of our supply chain. kind of bringing that factor in a little bit further on, a little bit further up in your decision making process, or as you're thinking about future state and how you continue to keep your operation moving forward, that might be something that you could consider now, especially with, again, with the wins in our sales. There's a lot of focus in on whether or not local and stateside manufacturing can be brought back, or what can we do internally. This is something that it might behoove us at this point, again, as suppliers, to think through. Maybe 10 years ago it didn't make sense for us to purchase these key components from the US, but maybe today it does. Considering what's happened in the past 10 years, maybe it does make more sense. So doing a bit of a review, again, it goes back to what we talked about last session. Having a regular review of your operation, specifically your supply, your suppliers, your supplier integrity, the timelines, all of that good stuff, especially for those key components. Um, and then on the flip side, the same thing with the globalization. I mean, I think we know at this point we're very much in a global society. So, you know, what does it make sense within our supply chain to look globally for, especially if you have more, let's say there's subcomponents in that mid range that are maybe very important to what you buy, but there's a lot of suppliers that are out there. Maybe there's that opportunity that you have to do some flips, and say, well, we were buying this from a customer here, we can get an 80% discount elsewhere. I mean, I think that's probably always ongoing, but that is something that I think to consider moving forward, that we aren't becoming necessarily any less global, as far as our supply chains are concerned. So considering that, in how you're positioning yourself in the future, would be very important. One thing I will note as well, for the localization piece, is, there's an element of future state for that localization. There's an element of future state that can also come into play when you think about quantities of material delivered. So just one potential strategic, kind of move that you could make is to say, all right, we get a fantastic rate for a certain component that is extremely important to our overall build from outside the US. But we are a little concerned that it's single threaded. So right now we only have one supplier for this part, and it's global. Um, could a potential strategy be to say, well, maybe what we do is we foot the bill at the higher cost for 10% of our deliveries for that part number, whatever it is, that component you're looking for. Maybe we could say the cost of that could be allocated towards, supplier integrity cost. And so, if it's, 50% more, for a key component to buy it stateside, is it worth splitting off 10% of business? A, to have that supplier be within your supply network. B, to have, you take a single threaded supplier, and you kind of abolish that single threaded nature of that supplier. So you have a little bit more, integrity for your supply chain. And then you can also say, well, yeah, it's more expensive, but that's kind of the cost of widening our supply chain and giving ourselves, more strategic elements moving forward, so that we can pivot if we need to, things like that. So just a way, again, a lot of this is going to be, how do we think about future state? And those are just some ideas of the way you may be able to frame out a supplier. Traditional thinking is lowest cost, quickest speed. Sometimes you have to say, all right, wait a minute, let's pump the brakes here and think about strategy and long-term success, especially of those key components. And then finally, this one will probably come as no surprise. Number 5 here, automation. I'm sure many of you are dealing with that now, either within your own organization or within the suppliers, or folks who are, who you're supplying to. Automation is becoming, well, it has been for many years, let's say, on the forefront of our operations. It's also becoming more and more, integrated within our kind of standard day to day within supply chain as well. Automating forms, automating, information based off of what we have in our data sets. Of course, going back to digitization and getting that digital footprint. The more of that you have, the more capability you have to automate, and to reduce kind of overall workloads, so that you can focus in your day to day efforts on more, kind of strategically important, operation pieces, or elements of your operation, follow ups, customer communication, things like that. If you're spending lots of time filling out forms that could be automated within your supply chain community, that takes time away from those interactions that you can have. And again, if we're starting to think back to session number one about utilizing our supply chain to dig in and find potential streams of revenue, that's one of those elements that gets hit really hard when you have folks who are operating, again, filling out forms and doing that type of thing, as opposed to maybe studying a little bit more of who they're selling to, what they're selling, and looking for those opportunities for revenue sources. So you can kind of flip that with the expansion of automation. You can gain some of that time back, create a little bit more time buffer for your folks, so that they can focus in on those elements of their role that could kind of add more to the bottom line. Or whatever other strategic operations need to be done, they don't have to do as much of that. So that's why automation. That's just one of many ways that automation can and will be kind of implemented, and reasons why it's being implemented across the board. That
Uh,
said,
Adam, we have one question in the chat.
sure, yes, absolutely.
Backing up a second. Would you pass along the cost of 10% supplier across all orders to cover increased costs of the 10%?
Um, would we pass along the cost of 10% supplier across the orders to cover increased cost of the 10% supplier? That could be. I mean, if I was personally involved in this, and thinking about utilizing a stateside supplier, is that what you're asking? If it's utilizing a stateside supplier that was 10% more, and how you would, yeah, I mean, you could do that. I mean, it depends on how your cost collection is done behind the scenes. If you have pegging that pegs a specific order to a specific cost, then which that's kind of deep dive into the data side of it. If your pegging is automatic, which I would venture to say a lot of folks probably don't have automatic pegging, but if your pegging is automatic, whatever's component that you bring in that has identifiable information will peg the cost back to the original order. So whatever that individual cost piece was for that order that you brought in per purchase order, it will peg it to that original cost. So if you don't do that, if you don't have that integrated kind of pegging, or that integrated like piece for piece and the exact cost of piece and how it rolls into a spot, then yeah, I mean, I would probably say you could kind of spread that 10% across all of the final assembly for whatever quantities that you're building. So let's say you're building, 190 of those pieces come from, you say Saudi Arabia is your subcomponent, and then 10% come from Alabama. And yeah, you could take that increase in cost and just say, all right, all 100, we're going to take the total cost of that subcomponent and divide it across the 100. That would be one way of kind of spreading it individually. Um, yeah, and just saw the question. Yeah, so if your process allows it no pegging, then you have the option to spread the cost. Otherwise, you accept the added cost as a price of doing business. Yep, you can. I mean, it all depends on on the buckets that you've created. So if you've got a strategy and you say, okay, we're gonna bucket, if we're gonna bucket this cost as, we want to spend, you know, $20,000 on supplier, single threaded supplier reduction. Let's say that's a project that you have on your team. Is you thought about it early on in the year and say, one of the things we've noticed is we've got too many single threaded suppliers. We want to reduce that. So we're willing to put $20,000 to develop more supplier base. Well, this could be wrapped into that cost as well. So you could, and that's kind of a bucketing thing, as far as where you want to bucket the money. So you could say, well, we will bring that down to what we can get it for from an external supplier, and we're getting 90% of it. So we'll take whatever overage it is, that 50% cost increase for those 10% of items that we're buying, and we'll take that money and we'll take it from the pool that was the specific project that we have early on, of money, $20,000. So let's say it's $2,000. We'll take that $2,000 from that bucket as far as accounting is concerned, as a way to say this was a way for us to reduce a single threaded supplier. So normally speaking, we wouldn't do that. And again, it all just depends on how you pull your money around, and what that looks like long term. I mean, overall, the tail end of it, when it comes to the end of the day, kind of it's all the money that you have coming into your company versus all the money that you have going out. So it will kind of come into play at that top level anyway. But yeah, I mean, you could do it either way, depending on the strategy, as far as your company goes. And what your goals are, and if you have a concerted effort to try to reduce single threaded suppliers and things like that. So But that's a really good question on where it would come and how you would take it out of kind of the framework of your accounting piece. But yeah, I mean, I would probably say, spreading the cost. Um, it may increase, you know, per part cost overall, and you may see a little bit less overall. But again, long-term strategy, if you're thinking, where do we want to be 5 years from now? We don't want to be caught with no backup supplier. So it's worth it to pay a little extra today to continue to engage that stateside supplier. Keep some money flowing in that direction. Keep that communication going, because hey, that's another opportunity for a potential sell to them. Either something that you're trying to sell, or you're going to keep that network going. So there's a lot of things, a lot of good things that can come from that. Not just, well, we have a backup supplier. I mean, that's great, but you also have someone else in your network. It's a potential source of communication. It's a potential source of knowledge, potential future revenue for them to you. So there's a lot that can happen, especially with, what we talk about, integration. So the more integrated you get with your suppliers, the more you're going to know about what they're doing. The more integrated you get with your vendors and who you're selling to, you're going to know a little bit more about your operations, and you can see more of that area of where you can help them. So it can open your eyes to more potential revenue, and areas that you can go, products that you can create, or services you can provide. Very good question, though. Very good question.
Thanks, Adam.
Absolutely. All right, so technology. So I'm not going to go in depth here, because I'm not a salesperson for any particular company, and there's a lot of companies that get wrapped up into all of these different elements of the technologies that you can use, and where we're going to go moving forward, or at least where your customers may be going or your vendors may be going. And again, it all depends on your own individual strategy as a company, who you are, what you're looking to do, who your customers are, what they need. All of that has to be wrapped into your kind of your technological or technology framework for your strategy and what you do. However, as I was saying, you're living in a world that is dependent on other groups as well. As a member of that supply chain, other folks are going to be changing to meet the needs of everybody else. So you're in a world that is ever changing, which is why process improvement and constant assessment is such an important part of your overall strategy in every area, both operations and supply, in everything you do. Kind of that constant thought of how can we kind of get a little better is really important to integrate throughout the entire, all of your groups. Because everybody else is doing that as well. So people are looking for that edge, right, all the time, which means when an edge comes up, digitally speaking, or an edge comes up within certain processes or tools, you're going to see more of that integration with their operations, especially larger suppliers who you may be supplying to. Larger companies or consumers are going to be looking for these type of strategies. So again, doesn't mean you have to adopt it, doesn't mean you have to spend a ton of money to do it today, but at least thinking through, how could you connect in if in future state you need to adopt it. And that's why I point to the digital thread again, both internal and external. The digital thread, or digitization, or digital footprint, whatever you want to call it, that kind of using computers to gather data and house it in storage systems, and being able to read through it some and use that to make decisions. That is the way of the future, really, for most operations. So there's an internal element of that, which is, how do you pull and capture and store that data internally, and then review it? And we'll actually jump down to number 4 there as well, with artificial intelligence, which I'm sure many folks are probably already using, or at least definitely hearing about and thinking about. But your digital thread, that's where artificial intelligence can come into play. It's where, something as simple as correlative analysis that your engineers might do, or, when you're correlating data points, you have to have the data points before you can correlate and understand like what your data is telling you. So creating some sort of an internal thread that allows you to pull those data points, house them in a some sort of a data warehouse, and being able to use that to make decisions is really important. And then, like I mentioned, external, I'll kind of just briefly touch that as well. That's kind of that integration piece. So if you hold it internally, you have to determine what is ours and what do we not want anybody else to see. And that's an important question to ask. And then what is something that maybe we'll be able to split off if we want to look for those integrations or those connecting points with our data. So thinking about it from that perspective, and again, just putting something very simplistic in place as a starting point might be a good thought. But when you jump down to number 4 there, artificial intelligence. this is data plays the massive part in artificial intelligence, obviously, because that's what artificial intelligence is looking at. It's looking at data points, it's looking at digitization, it's looking at your digital footprint, and it's kind of coming up with different connections and ways of viewing and looking at that, and then integrating strategic moves or suggestions based off of that data. And that's, again, if I had someone who is a professor, they probably be slapping me on the hands, because that's a that's a very dumbed down version of what's happening behind the scenes with artificial intelligence. But essentially speaking, that's kind of what you're looking at. You got something artificially looking at these so that you don't have to have an individual person reviewing and cross-examining and looking for all of these footprints that are related. Your artificial intelligence can do that in the blink of an eye in many cases, especially once you start talking about quantum computing. And I won't go in depth into there because I'm by far a novice in the area, but quantum computing could be something to at least to look into as well, especially if your digital footprint is very robust right now. That might be something you want to look at. If you're on the early stage of digitization and you're working off of some kind of basic data right now, quantum computing may play a part in how you integrate future state. But as far as like adopting quantum computing currently, especially in its current state, because it's not widely used. But again, since we're looking into the future, that's why I'm kind of bringing this stuff up. That could be where you go. The speed at which the computing will happen once quantum computing comes around, the speed at which your artificial intelligence will operate is just it's you can't even explain how fast it will be able to go and review and correlate and all those good things that artificial intelligence will be able to bring to the table potentially. Um, but at least, again, this is more of the thought process on saying, all right, where am I today and where might I be in the future? So starting to maybe split off some time for different key elements of your supplier groups to say, have we ever looked into, and I'll say number two and number three, data mining or process mining. So these are two kind of functions, and there are different tool sets. Like I said, there are different tool sets out there for each of these elements. Many, many, many that you can use. Some of them are off the shelf that you can purchase. Your companies can start using, or you can have that are kind of tailored to your own operation. But data mining has been around for quite some time. When you talk about metadata analysis or data analysis, and going in and finding those individual data points and finding out what that tells you, and also correlation and saying, okay, well, here's a data point, and kind of connecting those two, and then coming up with some good movement forward. Kind of the next step of that, which is something I'm really excited about, is what's called process mining. And again, I'm still learning a ton about process mining, but I would encourage anyone who has maybe a little bit of a digital footprint already in place, and you kind of have your work instructions that are already out there in operations, let's say, or you have a systems based processing in your supply chain. So you kind of have, you've got databases that are kind of holding your data for you, and you're working off of like off of sheets, and you're doing that kind of thing kind of in a digital footprint already. What process mining does, and we're getting close to the end, so I won't go super in depth, sadly, but what process mining does is it kind of looks at all of your processes in the aggregate, and it will say, how can you place those processes within the full stream of your operation a little bit more efficiently? How can you reduce some elements out of those processes that might be redundancies, and then condense that process to a simpler process, and then you place it within a certain flow and chain of events within your operation? It's really fantastic, and it's using an artificial intelligence kind of baseline to look through your overall operation, find those processes that can be condensed or brought in together into one framework, and then placing them accurately and correctly to make your throughput efficient, quicker, less cost, the whole shebang. So again, I won't go into depth, but I'm really excited about that potential moving forward. So it's just something I wanted to kind of feed over to this group and say, hey, if you're there, if you're already kind of you have a digital footprint now, you've got some processes outlined and placed in your digital footprint. Look, that might be something you want to look into. And again, doesn't have to be that you adopt it today, but maybe, in 5 years, maybe that's your 5-year plan, is to say, I would like to have a robust enough digital footprint where we can institute process mining and make it even that much better. It's just some areas that could be beneficial long term to your organization, and yeah, and in your strategy. So bringing up strategy, here we go. We're at the last slide of the day. to talk about strategy and how do we integrate kind of what what we've done from the very beginning all the way through to our final strategy and where we are today. So kind of built from week 1 all the way to week 5 here. And we're going to say, what are some key things that we can take away just from today as far as future state, and couple that a little bit with being the best supplier that we can be. So localize key components when possible. I talked a little bit about that on the last couple of pages. Focusing on single threads and focusing on that high level, most impactful subcomponents or potential components to your organization. So whatever it is to your build structure or your product lines, what would take you down the quickest and the longest, and maybe focusing on some of those areas for this type of an operation. So if you're in supply chain, working with your operations group to determine those key components. And again, kind of wrapping this all up nicely in a package. At the very first stage, I started talking about, your operation overall, your entire company is the link of the supply chain. So when we think about supply chain, we're not thinking about just one hat that one person might wear or one department in one group. Supply chain touches everything. And you can see that in kind of where we've gone. And you can see how your supply chain is kind of that it's a cog in the wheel, sure, that goes outside of your company, but it also, those teeth of that cog go right back into your company. So they're really not separated. So a strategy that incorporates your supply chain along with your operations, along with all those other different elements that make your company go, is extremely important to look at it in the whole. So focusing one thing again, focusing on these key components when possible, but looking at your localized strategy. What can you do to help risk mitigation or to minimize risk? And that's basically what this first part is how do you minimize your risk by potentially bringing some of those components back stateside, maybe going global, maybe, but having a solid plan for what happens as well. So at minimum, what you can do, let's say you're not ready at all to dive into that kind of a deep dive into your components. What you can do is create a strategy that says, okay, if and when we are ready to kind of evaluate, find out those key components and whatever, what would we do if we found that? So just having a framework and a process for evaluation, and then steps that you take if you find a part that is single threaded. What is the next step? Do you look inside? Do you look outside? Who does that part? Kind of framing that out as roles and responsibilities, and just creating kind of that strategy for your supply chain so that you're not automatically caught and you have no path forward. Like that's kind of something that anybody out there can do on day one. It doesn't really cost a lot of extra money. It just takes a little bit of time to say, let's create a framework for what we do and how we evaluate our part numbers and what we have coming in, so that we don't get caught single threaded or whatever that potential problem could be. And then if we do, these are the things, these are the people we talk to, this is the departments that have to be involved. We kind of have a plan for what we do if we do find those parts that are single threaded, and we do have a supplier that says, yeah, we were supposed to ship this to you, a week ago, and it's not going to go out for 6 months. If that's a key component, what do you do at that point? Just having a plan and a strategy for that up front, it will help you. And I did make a little a note at the bottom. Remember, small steps and proactive moves lead to more possibilities. This is a lot. There's a lot that can be done, but it takes little bits at a time. I've said multiple times, and I think you would all probably agree. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon, and you got to think about it long term and taking small steps to slowly improve these type of things. So don't get too overwhelmed if all this stuff is like, whoa, there's a lot going on out there, and I really need to integrate everything, and we need to be there today. It's a long process, but starting to think about how you integrate these things is extremely important, and that is something you can do today. The second piece is include risk mitigation and supplier determination. We talked about that a number of times in the past few sessions and even in this session, but risk mitigation is really important, and creating that, especially starting at that top level of those items that could really cause you to go down for a long period of time, and kind of working your way off in a strategic method of how you attack that potential problem. Do you know which parts might cause you main issues? Okay, great. Well, then you have that information. What's the next step? Okay, well, if they could cause you major issues, do you have any potential for backups that are already in your network, right? Again, using your supply chain network, we say, well, this part over here and this product line could cause us a major downturn, and we wouldn't be able to make that product line for a year if something happened with that, and they are single threaded. Well, look at that, whoever's supplying that key piece, and say, well, do we have any other like vendors in our own in our network right now? And if not, there's a lot of resources out there who can help you connect to those potential vendors, especially stateside vendors. Like I said, I kind of keep pushing that, but something to not just kind of ignore because it seems like it would be cheaper just to go global. Sometimes it makes sense again to pay maybe a little bit extra for that key component, at least a portion of that key component, in order to keep that supplier chain kind of intact, so that it doesn't take you down long term. Um, Consider computing power. Again, that's the digitization, the digital footprint. What are you doing with your knowledge? Is it being captured in any way? Is it being used? If it is being captured, if it's digital, or have you ever really thought about your operations, whether that be supply chain centric and how you're filling out your purchase orders or your purchase recs or whatever, and can it be automated? And are you capturing that data anywhere to determine how long it takes you to get a PO turned around? Like that kind of information is actionable intelligence once you have it in an aggregate and once you can kind of display it in a data set. So if you're at day one and you don't have any of that, like, could you capture some of that? That might be the question that you ask when you're looking at your operation. Create baseline digital connections. And so this is something as far as like future state thinking through. If you're going to be integrating more in the future, potentially, if that's something that your business decides that would be wise, um, how do you start prepping for that digital connection? So again, it could be that you look into a tool set that is publicly available that you could purchase from someone and they could bring in and they could help you capture data. Um, Maybe what you do is you say, well, we'd really like to get that tool set. We're not in a financial place right now where we can actually adopt that into our processes or into our organization, but I can gain a lot of information, public knowledge about how that operation runs and what I would need to have on the digital side to integrate directly with that tool set, maybe. And I start creating my internal operation to accommodate that when we are ready for it, maybe in the future, if we have a bit more of a budget for that type of a tool. You can already start to lay the foundation. It's a lot harder to bring in a tool like that and then say, oh, well, in order to get the most out of this tool, you need to change 40 of the ways 40 operations that you're doing right now in order to digitize them so that you can connect into our tool. If you think about that future state, and again, you're thinking long term, where are we going to be in 2, 5, 10 years? You can start saying, all right, I'm aiming to bring in that tool set. How can I set up today some foundational pieces in my digital footprint that will allow me to connect there, to use that tool to the best of its abilities, if that's where you want to go. It also gives you the ability to pivot. So if a better tool comes into the market in 2 years, well, you've already got a foundation at least to maybe start connecting into that tool. Things like that. It's just kind of getting in that thought process of how do we capture the data and how do we move forward in a digital world. Um, if you're not already doing that, which I'm sure most folks probably are, at least it's on your mind. Um, Prepare for future integration. I won't belabor that one anymore. I think we've talked a little bit about that quite a bit, but that's kind of in the same vein as far as integrating in either with those data sets and those tools that you want to use, or integrating in with potential future customers or vendors who want to integrate to your systems so that you can ingest some more of their data. Again, creating that digital footprint across the board that will help you create those data-driven decisions on how you operate and how you move through. Just thinking about it and looking into creating those connection points may behoove your company today. Um, and then continue to think broadly. We started out with that in session number 1, and I'll end with that in session number 5. Thinking a little bit more broadly, potentially. And again, it might not be in your company kind of vision to go any wider. You may have 2 or 3 customers that you supply, and that's all you're really looking to do. And that's totally fine. I'm not telling you have to, you need to, or whatever. However, looking into who your company is, it goes back to the why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And of course, what is your vision for your company? What is the mission of your company? And then thinking through, okay, well, maybe you don't need to try to gain a ton of more business. You want to shore up those key customer bases and continue to supply there. Um, it all just depends on what your company is thinking. But if you are thinking, we need to capture more market, we need to get more sales, we need to grow. This thought process of leaning out your system, reducing the waste, integrating, technologies where you can, and using more of your digital footprint to make data-driven decisions. Some of that stuff is going to be it's going to be a natural and almost, integral part of what you're doing moving forward, moving in more to a digital world that is going to be looking for opportunities to use artificial intelligence. It is going to be looking for opportunities for your customers and potential vendors, to use these key pieces of technology and items that we're going to want to do future state. Um, at minimum, thinking about how do you fit and how do you integrate into that new world, and setting some goals, setting some of those stepping stones in place where maybe you're not anywhere close to where you want to be today digitally, uh, but you've got to start somewhere. And again, it goes down to that bottom. Remember, small steps and proactive moves lead to more possibilities. So don't be reactive. Don't have the market tell you you have to convert to digital because we just can't integrate. We can't use you as a supplier anymore because you have no, we don't know your throughput. We don't know we don't know your delivery times. We don't know how long it takes to build this. We don't know how any of these things that are digitally would help them. Don't have to react to that lickety split. Try to at least, again, it may not work within, to your overall strategy and plan, but at least be thinking about, is this our opportunity now to digitize, to grow in our technologies, and maybe be more attractive as a supplier, moving forward. So I would love if anybody has questions or thoughts or uh, comments to make. I would love to hear or discuss. Um, so I will open up the floor to the group and to Dave and team. But it has been really fun, and I've really enjoyed everybody coming. And thank you so much for continuing to come back and listen. And we say share this with your friends, the folks you network with, your suppliers, your vendors, and all, so that we can all kind of rise together.
All right, thank you, Adam.
Sure.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute and speak up. All right, well, I'm guessing the silence means you've answered everything, Adam.
Amazing.
Uh, well, again, I'd like to thank you for all the time you put into this. The past 5 weeks, this has been really great. I've learned a lot. I know talking to some of the folks at our team, we've all been just baffled by how much we've gained from this. And a few of our clients I've spoke to that are on here have also been very appreciative and spoke very highly of it. So thank you so much for the great information. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me after the fact. Tracy will be sending out the slides as she has in the weeks past. And I believe Tracy will also be sending out some certificates as well for those of you who have attended. So be on the lookout for that. And if there's anything we can do or you have any questions for us or for Adam, don't be a stranger. We're here to help, and we want to do as much as we can to help you build your supply chain.
Absolutely.
Oh, good question. Hannah asked, what's the best way to get in touch with the MEP team? I'm going to put a couple of emails in the chat here, and we can have Tracy also include the contact information. And so I'm trying to type and talk, and I can't do two things at once today. I'll put a couple emails in the chat, and also Tracy will include that when she sends the slides out today. All right, and with that, there you go. Those are in the chat. With that, again, thanks everybody. It's been a good time, and we appreciate you being part of our group. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks all.